And I joke around to this day, like even with my wife, that I had three main bugaboos when it came to that first date, right? And questions that must be answered. One, how much are you contributing to your 401k? Two, what's your credit score? And three, how much do you have in outstanding debt? Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We're your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly. Each week, we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in. Welcome back to Financial Fortitude. On this episode, Michael and I delve into the top 5 things couples should do after saying I do. An insightful discussion on the complexities of financial planning when merging finances with your significant other. We draw from our extensive client experience and personal financial journeys, offering valuable perspectives and practical advice. Make sure to listen through to the end, where we reveal 5 essential actions for couples to strengthen their financial fortitude. Of course, introducing my wonderful colleague, Michael Acosta, as we jump straight into the 5 must-dos or things couples should do before saying I do. Michael, how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm glad to be doing this again with you. I'm excited about this topic, right? Because you and I are on, 2 different phases of our life journey, right? I'm already married with kids. You're in a serious relationship, and marriage is probably on the horizon, right? From a timing perspective.
My significant other certainly hopes so.
No pressure, right?
Yeah, right.
May not be sending this podcast episode to her, but we'll see.
We'll see. She might listen to it down the road.
right after the fact. But no, when it comes to personal planning, like most of us don't aspire to do this on our own, right? As far as doing life, we want to do this with somebody. And I think it's important to start having those money conversations early on in the dating scene, right? As you're getting to know somebody, as you're starting to uncover the good, the bad, and the ugly, and figuring out, do we want to do life together forever, right? And taking it to the point where we're ready to say our do. So I'm excited to walk through these top 5 things that we feel are important, but also provide some foundation or insights into what are we seeing when we're interacting with our clients that, maybe it's single to dating to then becoming married.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess that prompts a question that I have for you, and it is, in terms of your situation, your dating life, how early was the financial picture a concern, or at least in the back of your mind? Of course, you didn't rush on the first date to say exactly what does your financial picture look like, but how important was it for you in getting started, or at least vetting that out through dating?
It was definitely important to me, and I joke around to this day, like even with my wife, that I had 3 main bugaboos when it came to that first date, right? And questions that must be answered. 1, how much are you contributing to your 401k? 2, what's your credit score? And 3, how much do you have in outstanding debt, right? Yep. And I jokingly say that, but in the grand scheme of things, when you're hitching yourself to somebody for the rest of your life, because that's the intent, and at least in my mind, you want to make sure that you're on the same page with what's going on financially with them, right? Because if you have the wherewithal to be able to assist them, then why not? But you also don't want to get married and then 6 months later after being married, find out, oh, hey, by the way, my spouse has 6 figures in consumer debt or $50,000 in consumer debt. And now we're trying to figure out how to work through not only this financial infidelity, but also, this eroding factor on our balance sheet and cash flow. So it's definitely important for me. And I'm curious now, turning the table on you, because you are in the dating scene still, right? In a serious relationship. So for you, how has these conversations come about? And, do you feel like they came out early on, or is it just something that organically progressed as you continued to date your significant other?
I think, especially in a dating world at least, where there is so much more accessibility to meeting new people and getting out there, right? Whether it be dating apps or just being online, or at least meeting as many people as you can in a new city as a young person. There are so many instances or opportunities to meet someone new that if you are looking for a serious relationship, that you can quite quickly find yourself saying, or at least thinking in the back of your mind, like, hey, finances begin to take a real hold as you get older and older on right. How you're dating someone. So I found, at least on my end, not to be the crazy person that asks, how much are you contributing to your 401k? What's your credit score? And what consumer debt do you have on the first date? What dating has looked like, especially as my significant other and I have gotten closer, it is just simply being strategic about understanding where they come from, why they think the way that they think, what is important to them, and it kind of slowly leads more so to that financial discussion, if that makes sense.
No, that absolutely makes sense, because there are things that you need to be aware of when taking those next serious steps. Right? We can't put enough emphasis on that. I think we both agree that when we decide to meet somebody at the altar and say I do, like that's something that we take to heart. That it's very personal, very serious. Most individuals aren't getting married with the expectation that, hey, this is going to fail. If they were, then what's the point of even getting married, right? Because that could lead to a huge financial disaster down the road. Now, with that being said, there are things that we all need to be aware of, and some of those are increased wealth building potential by being able to team up financially. Just think about it. There are a lot of opportunities where you can work jointly with somebody, and you just automatically create this compounding effect from an extraordinary wealth building potential. I'm curious, what are your thoughts in how individuals can maximize this effect of compounding joint efforts for their financial well-being based on your client experiences?
Whether it be personal or client experience standpoint, from a very psychological level first, is that life tends to feel, mean, at least be more significant when you have goals and you are sharing aspirations with people. Even before marriage, and I'm sure you can speak to this now that you're married, it's much more meaningful to accomplish goals, no matter how big or small, when you have someone else right there by your side to smile with and say, look what we did together, instead of look in the mirror and say, look what me did.
Yeah, exactly.
So this idea of, well, hey, now I have someone to share life with, and I have someone who's got just as powerful of a wealth building potential, maybe even more powerful than me, depending on the dynamic of the financial situation, we can now accomplish goals what we'd think in the early days are twice as fast, right? We've got double the income or double the savings power. But as you and I think a lot of our listeners know from a compound interest standpoint, what might double the first year quickly quadruples or 10 times is after 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so that's what oftentimes we're seeing with clients, is helping them or getting them to understand that, hey, teaming up will certainly level up your ability to take that next step and accomplish goals in the early days. But just as much as teaming up can help you, not teaming up can provide, or at least lead to, significant challenge if 3, 4, 6, 7 years down the road, we haven't taken any steps to get together and get serious and get on the same page.
No, and that makes sense, right? Because that leads to a different topic for a different day of disorganization. Yep. Because if you're both working as independents, then you're never going to be on the same playing field. You're never going to be focused towards the same goals, which kind of leads into this idea that I really love, which is leveling up, right? Leveling up towards consolidated goals. And this is something that I feel personally has truly allowed my wife and I to level up our finances by coming together and taking advantage of what we had prudently built on our own playing fields, but then consolidated together.
Now pause there. How did you consolidate? How challenging was the consolidation? You make it seem like, hey, we got together and it was just that easy, right?
What we did is we used ChatGPT and it just did it for us. Yeah, no, in the grand scheme of things, it was actually relatively complex, to be quite honest with you. The nice thing is that my wife and I worked in the finance industry together before, me transitioning into being a full-fledged financial planner or financial advisor. And so we each had our own independent financial identities, which a lot of folks are afraid of losing when they get married, right? And we'll talk about that, I imagine, later on in this conversation today. But she banked at her own bank, I banked at my own bank. So as we were dating and we got engaged and we were planning the wedding and everything, I was already asking the questions of, well, which bank are we going to use predominantly? And why are we using these certain banks? What are the benefits? What are the cons? And what are the inefficiencies? We came into our marriage with each of us owning our own real estate properties. So what that afforded us was the ability to say, hey, one of us will move in with the other, and let's short-term rental or long-term rental the other one to potentially derive passive income. Or when we started to grow our family, we had our first child and we were planning on having a second one, it was, hey, this home that we live in now that my wife owned is starting to close in on us. How can we leverage this one to then roll it into the next one and take that next step forward and take a step up towards our ultimate goals long term? right?
Instead of step sideways or perhaps step backwards by not
Correct.
working together.
Correct.
Yep.
And having that whole mindset of, well, this was mine. I don't want to get rid of it, and having that personal tie because I built it on my own, right?
Yep.
Like you made that comment earlier around like me, look what I did. And I just immediately thought of, because I love movies, Coach Carter, when he's like trying to teach his players the lesson, like after a game where they had success, and he's like, man, look at that knot. I tied that knot, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you got to eliminate that, because once you get married, it's no longer I and me, it's we and us. And not everybody views it that way, and I understand that. And you can put an asterisk next to that because there are probably exceptions to the rule, and we might talk about that later or do that on a separate podcast episode. But that's at least for me personally, how we were able to compound that, level up, and continue to work towards joint goals. Now, with those joint goals, you can still have sub-individualized goals.
Sure.
Right? And
I think that's a really important part. Someone who's not married yet, but I think it's still a really important part of marriage, is to still maintain some sense of individual identity. Hey, I've got things I want to accomplish or I think are important. They may not be exactly what you want to accomplish, but they're still part of my personality in some form or fashion.
Exactly. Yep. Do not lose your identity just because you're saying I do. Now, at the same token, you're probably marrying this person because they bring the best out in you in some way, right? So then it's a matter of, well, how can that other person support and either indirectly or directly positively influence the outcome of your potential goals?
Yep.
So, for me, that's how it's at least positively impacted us. And it's not all glamour. I mean, there are things that we fall short on within our marriage financially, but it's at least a discussion point that is very important and that is often overlooked because when you are leveling up, things can kind of get murky and it can become overwhelming. But that's where, hey, sit down one weekend, start to open up that conversation. If you like to have adult beverages, have an adult beverage, have that conversation and have fun with it, right? And just try not to take things personal if things don't go the way you want it to when having that conversation.
Especially in the early days, right? If you're able to step into that conversation before you tie the knot, and this is forever after, right? You can begin to use that, at least, and this is what I found in my experience, use it as an opportunity to get to know your partner more, right? What did you used to think about money, and how did your parents used to have or feel or view money when you were growing up? How has that kind of trickled down to where you are now and led to some of the decisions that you've made? You might learn some really cool or interesting things. You might learn some things that are a little shocking, or at least compared to your own upbringing, but that's still an exercise, or a very good exercise. And hey, I'm getting to know my partner as intimately as possible. All the fun stuff, of course, but then all the nerdy stuff in the back that we still need to figure out before we really decide to say I do.
No, of course. And one thing that comes up, and it's kind of terrifying in essence, and at least in my mind, but you have to take proactive steps when you're in a serious relationship and you're planning towards taking, the final step to I do in a marriage, and protecting your marriage from financial infidelity. So it shouldn't be overlooked or discounted that there are data reports and surveys that have been conducted by the likes of Wilkinson and Finkbeiner or Hernorm from 2023 and 2024. That about 45% of divorces are linked to financial problems. Like, if that doesn't scream, hey, have a proactive conversation around how we're going to tackle personal finances in our household, then I don't know what other red flag you need, because that's almost 50% of couples that get married get divorced.
It's flipping a coin, right? Yeah. It's like, hey, if divorce is in the cards, however many years from now, it's flip a coin whether it's going to be about your financial picture or not. That's scary when there's 1,000 other things that could lead to divorce, that just not being clear and concise about what's important financially and what is most meaningful and how to address things together. That's the first place to look when it comes to what conversation should we be having. But let's jump into that from an experience standpoint. What do you typically tend to see or find in the clients that you've worked with in the past, perhaps different from the experience that you and your wife have had?
I will say that one of the biggest client experiences that seems to be a common denominator, at least for our generation, right, is fear of losing financial identity. Because statistically, couples are getting married at a later age in life compared to generations past.
Yes.
And what that affords the current generation is the opportunity to build, in many cases, a strong financial foundation as an individual. So when it comes to consolidating and merging, it's really tough because you don't want to give up the right that you've created to do whatever you want with the money that you're earning, right?
Yep.
And so what I see is unequal divide of household expenses, or this conversation of, hey, and we're not going to take the next step forward until the financial imperfections you have on your balance sheet are addressed, right? Another way of saying that is that's your debt, not mine. Don't drag me down with you type of mindset. Yeah. Or it's just, hey, I don't want to look at this at all. And some of it might be psychological just based on the upbringing and experiences that I had around money. And so you just run with it. I want nothing to do with it. So then you're really never on the same page and you're just letting one spouse do all the legwork. But then when things don't go the way that you want them to, then you get upset, right? Because you weren't a part of the conversation, but you failed to recognize that, hey, I removed myself from the conversation.
Yep. I think I see it all the time. It's way more often than not that I'm seeing clients who've been married for months, years, longer than years, who still have separate bank accounts, even though all of their goals are essentially the same outside of maybe some small personal ones. I see clients who are Venmoing each other for the rent or the mortgage. Like, that seems crazy, right? In some form or fashion, if we're working as one household and we're Venmoing each other back and forth with the mortgage.
Just make sure you check off family and friends so that you don't get charged additionally for sending your portion of the rent.
Yes, right? And then what at least I have seen in past experience, especially on the client end too, a lot of that separation in this, hey, this debt's yours, not mine, and some of this misalignment, it leads to like secrets. It leads to withholding some specific information from spouses. I mean, we just talked about one of the biggest causes of divorce is ultimately financial strain, whether it's directly or indirectly. And one of the ways strain builds quickly is secrets. Wait,
Absolutely.
Why did this happen? Why have we been doing this? What should I have known? But I'm just now finding out. That's a problem.
No, of course. And in my mind, it makes our jobs at times more difficult than it needs to be. And It makes the management of cash flows in most instances less efficient, right? And so it can be tough to leave the bias at the door, right? But I am never afraid to share my personal experiences and successes and failures with my clients, because I think that's where I get to resonate with them, right? Being that we're in some very similar phases of life, or even within, a same generation, right?
Yes. So let's start there. I have two questions for you. The first of which is, now that you have gotten married, been married for a while, have kids, and have what I would consider more experience kind of stepping into this phase of life, what did you do that worked? And then what did you do that didn't necessarily work? And looking back, you're like, hey, that's kind of dumb or silly, or what were we thinking even trying that?
Yeah, I would say what's worked is identifying early on which bank accounts were we going to keep and which ones were we going to get rid of, and making sure that we both had access to those bank accounts. And then once we had that established, then having both of our incomes go into a single pot or into a single account. Because in my mind, it's just much easier to track inflows and outflows. And at the end of the day, if we want to become extraordinary wealth builders, we have to get really good at managing inflows, because there is a daily assault and attack on our cash flow. And it's just an eroding factor. It eliminates our ability to build wealth in an efficient and optimized manner. And that's what we want for ourselves. That's what we want for everybody, right? Is to become extraordinary wealth builders, because that's how we lead to financial flexibility. So for us, it was a matter of, hey, this is the bank that I've banked with for a long time. I have tons, and this may not be the best decision or the best reason to make the decision, but my wife was banking at Wells Fargo. I was banking at Bank of America. And then I was also banking at Ally Bank because of the high yield interest rates that were being offered. Now, she had more bill pays and auto pays set up at Wells Fargo. And it was kind of like, hey, I don't want to have to update all that. So
I was going to say a rivalry of the ages settled by bill pays, right?
Yeah. And automation, right? Which automation is fantastic. So I was like, you know what? I have no ties to Bank of America. I'm going to close that account. You give me access to Wells Fargo. I'll give you access to Ally. And we've set it up to where we live our lives out of Wells Fargo, and anything above and beyond what we need from like a month-to-month standpoint, the excess risk-free cash that we're building up for opportunities outside of the market is over at Ally Bank, right, for opportunities. And so that worked really, really well for us. An area of our financial relationship that I think we could continue to build off of would be setting time that's dedicated to reviewing the monthly spending. Because as you start to add kids and your family starts to grow, you lose more and more time to sit down and do the leisurely things that we love to do, such as
Yes.
reconciling our monthly statements, right? Everybody loves to do that, right? And there are so many apps out there that people use today to try to help themselves do that. And, even in financial services, we are not an exception to the rule to where our financial households don't get out of whack sometimes. Right?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
So-
The checking account is a very dangerous investment vehicle. How do you find, amidst all of the busyness, the time to set aside to dedicate to financial planning meetings with your spouse or significant other?
So what we've been able to do, and it's still a work in progress, right, is we set up times in the evening once the kids have been put to bed and we have some downtime to say, hey, these are the things that we need to focus on from a goal orientation, right? Whether it's a trip that we're trying to plan out. And the one thing that my wife and I do really well in being able to support one another is that she's very detail-oriented, very, very proactive in planning trips or planning things that need to get done and continuing to remind me like, hey, have you thought about this? Hey, have you addressed this? And it's not in any negative manner, but it's just in a positive reminder, right? Because she recognized that, hey, I'm busy, she's busy. We need to stay on the same page.
Sure.
So it's for us, it's at the end of the day, in the evening once the kids have gone to bed and we've had time to kind of decompress.
Okay.
Right.
How often is it?
I would say it's fairly frequently. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's not, we haven't got to the point to where it's planned.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's something that almost becomes second nature. And I like to call it that recurring money talk, right? Let's talk about the finances and have fun with it. Like finances need to be fun. And this is where the psychology of money comes into play, or behavioral finance comes into play, which I know you and I like to geek out about.
Yep.
But it's a question that we have to think about. And I believe you've shared with me, so I'm curious to get your feedback on this. But I believe you've shared with me in the past, like the mindset of abundance versus the mindset of scarcity, right? And so for you, because you're in that pre-marriage stage, serious relationship stage, have you had that conversation with your significant other on like what their viewpoint was on money? At least going from being under their parents' household to being a independent, self-sufficient professional and how they view it and utilize it? I'm curious.
Yeah, so we have had that conversation, although from my experience, very tactfully, especially with my significant other knowing that I work in the financial planning industry. I oftentimes use questioning or open-ended questioning either to my exploration or advantage. So it's about using tact when stepping into that type of conversation and really just being open and honest with what I'm looking to ultimately discover and hope to discover together with that person. Scarcity versus abundance, I think, is a challenge that all of us are afflicted with. Some of us, and I would say this is me in this category, are oftentimes like really challenged by this idea of scarcity mindset, right? A lot of the financial planning that I tend to do on a personal basis is driven by I need to make sure from a security, scarcity, and financial standpoint that moving forward, I have enough to secure what that future of those goals look like. I very rarely think that things are going to work out perfectly or more money's just going to show up, that I'm going to get that next raise, that the next client's going to walk through the door, that life is just going to work out. I am of the firm belief that you have to work and diligently plan for what you ultimately want life to look like.
So basically, no random check is going to show up in your mailbox that you just get to deposit, and now life is golden, right?
No, life never becomes golden. It's a series of really small steps that you take day after day, week after week, month after month. Whereas my significant other comes more so from a background of abundance, right? In this mindset of, as long as we keep doing the right things and we're thankful for what we have, I know more will come down the line. We'll be okay.
Absolutely.
Planning and being super diligent like that is not something she's really strong at. It's something that I tend to have much more strength in. So the conversations that we have been less about exactly how much money does each of us have and how is it going to contribute to our potential future union. And the conversations are more focused as to how do you feel about money and its effect on either your upbringing or the life that you've lived so far. How do you feel about working as a team versus working as an individual? And to be quite honest with you, I think that's really improved our relationship. Because in the beginning stages, it's always this like tiptoe or tap dance as to exactly how do we want to ask this question or when do we want to try to figure this stuff out. It's much easier to have those conversations, at least for us, when I've got a good understanding. What have things looked like for you in the past and how does it make you feel first instead of jumping straight into the numbers?
Well, and it leads me to another question that I have for you that you can either share based on your own personal experience, where you're at in life with your significant other, or maybe just the common denominator of client experiences that you've had to this date in your profession. But how common is it for you to see where both significant others or spouses are focused on stacking Benjamins versus, living their best life today, having those life experiences and at no expense keeping themselves back from just chasing those life experiences?
Yep. I'd call this from a little bit of my own relationship, but then more so from clients. It's very rare that I see two clients 100% on the same page at any given time. Generally, one client is more abundance mindset driven and wants to take the life experience and make sure that we do have fun and enjoy what life looks like in our younger, higher earning years. And a lot of clients have the exact opposite approach that's kind of more so on my end, a little bit more scarcity, preparing for the future, leveraging the idea that, hey, there is a future that we need to be saving for. But very infrequently do I see two clients who are saving every single penny that comes into their balance sheet. Very rarely do I see two clients that are spending every single dollar that comes through their checking account. It's always this mix of one spouse saying, oh, she spends or he spends way too much, I can't control it. And the other one saying, well, hey, we've only got one life to live. What are we doing saving all of it? And that's, right, I think, where someone like yourself, myself, begins to step in and try to have a conversation about, hey, what are some things to think through, or why should we prioritize perhaps both of these different ideas, abundance or scarcity?
For whatever it's worth, Brady, the advice that I can give you that's really worked well for us in being able to build some positive, joint financial disciplines, the biggest one in my mind that most couples should consider, and this is, I don't know if this really made our top 5, but spending thresholds, right? What is something that I'm going to buy? And this is something that we set up early on. If I'm out and about, and it kind of goes back to our financial independence or our financial identity as an independent individual. If I'm out and about by myself or with my friends without my better half, and I see something that I want to purchase, what is that threshold that warrants me making a phone call or sending a text to just say, hey, I'm out and about, this is something that I've been looking at, or maybe just something that's on sale, and I think it would be fun to have, or maybe we need it, or we've been thinking about this. Should I go ahead and buy it? Or are you okay with me going ahead and buying it? And it's not so much that you are now beholden to them, right? And I think that's where a lot of people get conflicted with this tactic. It's more so that it's hey, I acknowledge that we are now a team. And before I just go swipe the card without having this conversation with you because it exceeds this threshold that we've created, I want to have this conversation and you tell me what you think, right? Be candid with me. And every relationship should be able to do that.
So tell me more about then. How often are you making those phone calls? And when setting that threshold, is the effort to try to never make the phone call or make it more often? What's the thought or the strategy, at least as to what you've seen worked?
Well, that's kind of the floating target, right? Because that threshold could be as low as you want it to be, which might trigger a conversation more frequently, or it might be so high to where you're kind of taking advantage of the situation. Sure. Right? So it's going to be unique to each couple based on the amount of income they're bringing in, but also what they feel comfortable with from a spend limit for each other. You have to set that up based on your own preferences. Unfortunately, like I can't give anybody that type of finite dollar amount because it's going to be different from couple to couple, household to household, based on lifestyle needs, right?
Sure.
Some people like $50, which would be pretty tough in today's economic environment because of cost
of living. You bring one of your kids out to eat with you, you're making a phone call, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, it's in my mind, it's less about the going out to eats and more about the, hey, brand new set of golf clubs. Do I really need them? How does this benefit the overall household? How often do I play golf? Let's have that conversation. Most of the time, my wife doesn't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with it for her. And it's because we are on the same page. We're working towards the same goal. So when those types of purchases come up, they're not coming up every week, every month. It's, spread out.
Yep.
And I also think from a psychological standpoint, like we need to be able to enjoy the now, or else we're going to become unmotivated and undisciplined. And it's just not going to be a good situation. So
that's what I try to at least tell my clients is as much as you'll hear from me in what is the best possible decision to make, you'll also hear that at the end of the day, your life is not a spreadsheet. It's my job to help show how a spreadsheet may affect what life looks like, but life isn't the spreadsheet, right? We can't set the $1,000 spend or threshold or spend limit and say, you know what, we're never breaking this. You need a phone call every time. It must be a discussion. There's always going to be some wiggle room. There's always going to be this encouragement of abundance in some instances and encouragement of scarcity in other instances. The last question I have before we jump into the to-dos, we're almost there for those who are still with us. Tell me more about how you financially parent your children and how that is a whole different animal than just simply combining your finances.
Well, I will say there is no manual for how to parent your children. So whenever you get to that point in your personal life, your personal journey to where you start to expand your family and add little minions to your balance sheet, there is no right or wrong. Now, I will say most parents, especially for my wife and I and the couples that I work with, there are things that we want to be able to pass on to our children. And this kind of goes back to the upbringing that we've had with money, as well as the experiences we've had with money, how we view money, whether it's a tool or whether it's a means to an end from a psychological standpoint. What we're focused on now, because my children are 7, almost 5, and 2.5, and then we're expecting a fourth, in the fall of this year. It's
adding
delayed
another investment to the balance sheet, right?
Hey, one of them is bound to be successful. That's my retirement plan, right? All of them are blessings, and we love, that we're able to expand our family. But what I'm trying to pass on to my children, especially my 2 older ones at this point, because they can conceptually grasp it a little bit more, is delayed gratification, right? Yep. It's this idea that, you get money for your birthday, and we'll give you money whenever we go out, or we'll cover the bill, right? And we can either spend the money that you've accumulated right now based on something that you want, or we can wait to a later date to then realize that. And so I have fond experiences and memories with my oldest child, and where, she had birthday money. We went to the store, and there was a toy that she saw that she really liked, but it wasn't the one that she absolutely wanted. Yep. And there was one just like the one that she wanted, but it wasn't the one that she wanted. And so I pull out my phone, I look on the app, we can order it online, we can get it shipped to the house, it'll show up, 5 business days later. And so trying to explain to a 6-year-old, hey, I recognize you like this toy. They don't have it here.
Yep.
I see that they have it somewhere else, and I can push this button and it'll show up at our house.
But you have to wait 5 whole days. Yeah.
Do you want to wait and get the one that you want, or do you want to go ahead and get the one that you want now? What do you think the response was?
Of course now.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? I want to take this bad boy home, and I want to take it out of the box, and I want to play with it. And so, I'm cringing inside because I'm like, no, that's the wrong answer. But they're kids, right? They have to learn. Now, the one thing that I'm battling through now is we'll be driving in the car, all of us, and it's, hey, can we go out to eat to this place? And I chuckle inside, and I'm like, no, we have food at home, or that's not on the menu today, because we're very menu oriented in our household, just to make the weeks easier. Or I'm like, hey, did you bring your money? And they're like, no, you got money.
Of course not, Dad.
You got money. You'll pay for it. And I'm just like, that's not really how it works. But in today's day and age, it's very infrequent that I ever carry cash or that I'm having to go to an ATM. And so all my children really see is that whenever we go make a purchase, hey, Dad's just swiping a card and we get to have this great experience, right? Or we get to go home with this object. That's what's led me to try to learn and get really good at the language I use when engaging with my children in those moments. And this stems from a book that I read that focuses on behavioral finance and just the overall psychology of money in general. But it's using phrases of, hey, that's not a priority right now, or that's not something that we're focused on today, or hey, let's revisit that. because the money that we have, we want to use for something different currently, as opposed
Instead of,
yeah,
but I
instead
think
of
a lot of us are used to hearing or grew up hearing,
we can't afford that.
yeah,
We don't have the money for that.
That's what drives that scarcity mindset, right?
Absolutely.
Of, hey, why do I feel like we have such a scarcity-driven mindset that we always need to be saving for the next day? Because enough times of hearing we can't afford that or we don't have money leads to those thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tough. And it's so easy as a parent where you're in the store, you're maybe have lost your patience. I don't know. Maybe you're running behind schedule or maybe you're distracted and your child's like, hey, can we buy this? And it's just like, no, we don't have money for that. It's so quick to come off the tongue. And so if you say that enough to your child over the course of 5, 7, 10, 12 years, they're going to start to build this association with money of, hey, we don't have any money.
Yep.
Right? When that's not the case. It's just that that's not a priority. And so by saying, hey, that's not a priority right now, or that's not what our goals are focused on right now, or hey, let's revisit that or discuss why we didn't purchase that today when we get home, it then starts to create subconsciously this purpose-driven concept around the utilization of money. At least that's how I'm framing it in my mind, and what I'm trying to instill in my children is that, hey, every decision that we make should be purpose-driven. It shouldn't just be because I can, because that's not how the world works, unfortunately.
And I think that brings us almost perfectly a segue from where we were in the beginning of the episode to the last 5 to-dos before you say I do. What I'm learning or hearing, and even how you're parenting a 6-year-old, right, is that what drives a lot of decision-making is a goal focus, which is super important as to, hey, why we need to get organized early and often. It is super important as to why setting goals are important, and it leads us directly into what are the top 5 things that Michael and I feel that all couples or all individuals who are beginning to combine their finances need to consider as some of the top 5 things to do before saying I do. I'll let you take number 1.
Yeah, number 1 in my mind is C cubed, right? Communicate, communicate, communicate. You can't over communicate about your personal finances. I'm sorry. If you want to debate me on that, I'm happy to debate you on that. But too much communication when it comes to your personal finances is rarely a bad thing, right? And so you need to get on the same page with your spouse or your significant other who you're planning on hitching yourself to for the rest of your life on spending versus savings goals. We talk about it all the time. What does it mean to be an extraordinary wealth builder, right? Are we targeting that? Are we tracking towards that? What do we need to do to adjust to recapture cash flows, money that's going out the back door, that's just floating and mindlessly being spent so that we can work towards the things that we want to achieve personally, professionally, and financially? Yep. Also, YNAB. There's an app out there called YNAB. I'm not saying you need to go download it, but it basically stands for you need a budget. Set a budget. And you can have multiple budgets throughout the course of the year. You can have a beginning of the year budget. You can have a summer budget. You can have a holiday budget. Holiday budgets are phenomenal, right? Especially if you come from a large family like I do. And if there's an expectation that you want to buy your nieces and nephews and godchildren or siblings gifts around the holidays or birthdays or friends when they're having newborns, whatever it may be, or weddings, right? There's different seasons of life that we all go through that will require some sort of commitment of cash flow in some form in celebrating others' successes. And so set a budget for that. Create a spreadsheet. I'm a spreadsheet geek. Not everybody likes spreadsheets, but set a spreadsheet. Also define what the needs versus wants are, right? And
yes, that's a big one. And how each person thinks about needs versus wants.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. And that's where, some people view experiences as an absolute need. Why? Because it fills them back up. It's what makes them feel rejuvenated. It's what motivates them. It's what energizes them. Whereas someone else, they don't need the experiences. And that's where they just get hyper-focused on accumulation, squirreling away money, but then they're not on the same page as their spouse, and that's what can create issues.
Tension or the friction back and forth, right?
Absolutely.
If you're not communicating.
Absolutely, yeah, that C cubed. And then establish the responsibilities. Again, going back to the purpose-driven conversations, purpose-driven execution of your personal finances. Who's responsible for what when it comes to getting things done and solidified?
And defining some of that why. Like, why are you responsible for A, B, and C versus me responsible for C, D, and E? Like you mentioned, your significant other is much better at daily organization and keeping things on track. And because she has more skill, talent, or perhaps just more aptitude there, she's responsible for it. It might be because you don't want to do it, or perhaps you're just as good, but she is in a better position to do it. But in some form or fashion, there's a why behind who's making what decision and how and when it happens.
Spot on. You were spot on. So this actually takes us to the number 2 to do. And so I'm going to let you launch this one.
So number 2 is ultimately set joint goals, right? Be super specific and super experience driven, or at least I would say emotionally driven behind
goals,
the
right?
goals that you're setting. Yep. Smart goals. I don't love seeing, whether it's clients or even in my own relationship, hey, $100,000 in an investment account is a goal. I don't love seeing 10% into my 401k as a goal. It means nothing, right? It's just a number on a sheet of paper.
And goals aren't numbers.
Yep. So the second most important thing, at least that we see, is to set joint goals and to write them down. Have them on a sheet of paper, have them on your financial planning software, have them on the notepad that you keep, have them in the Notes app in your phone if that's how you keep track of things. And
what types of categories of goals are you typically coming across most frequently with your client engagements?
I'm typically seeing personal goals, both as individuals and as joint. I'm seeing professional goals, whether it's career-oriented or just lifestyle-oriented as a professional, personal, professional. And then I'm seeing some financial goals, right, in regards to what do the numbers perhaps look like. But I try to refocus more so on numbers as to how can you use money as a tool to ultimately accomplish what you're looking for or toward. So oftentimes I'm seeing goals as a family. Do we want to start a family? How big does our family want to look? Where is that family going to live? How are we going to raise our children? That's always a big one that we see. Oftentimes is a personal goal, travel. What does life experience look like? What parts of the world do we want to see as a couple? What parts of the world might we want to share or show our family? That's always a big one. Retirement is, I think, on everyone's goal list in some form or fashion, and I almost like to refer to retirement as just future lifestyle.
Right.
How do we want life to look? How do we wish to spend our time? I think what ultimately drives happiness with most of the clientele that I would characterize as most happy are the ones that have control over their day and over their time, the decisions that they make.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah. And just to be clear, if growing your family is a goal that you have, unfortunately, that's not something that we can assist with, right? That's something that you have to do personally. But no, we're here to support that and figure out, the numbers to be able to give you more confidence in taking the steps of growing your family and again, taking those next steps to saying I do. The third one, I like to refer to this as, let's mix it up or combining your B's. And I think you actually came up with that phrase, combining your B's, which I absolutely love. And it's really just consolidation. That's all it is. It's merging finances, everything that we've been able to build as independent, successful professionals and being able to become self-supporting. And it's just figuring out how can we join everything or consolidate everything in the most efficient and purpose-driven manner. Let's stop creating friction and let's start taking advantage of compounding effects, leveling up, teaming up, and just allowing these great growth rates to help us personally, professionally, and financially. When everyone's on the same page and everything's easily trackable, you are given an opportunity to find much more success. That's just my personal opinion.
Sure. What are some of the B's that are quick, easy hits for clients to right away look towards or say to their spouse or significant other, we have to combine B's? This is on our list today or this weekend.
Yeah. Joint banks, right? So again, figure out which banks you're going to use and why. Okay. If it's something like, hey, this is where most of my bills are being auto paid or bill paid through, I think that's sufficient enough, right? Especially
There's
if
another
someone's going
B,
to be more on
joint
it.
bills.
Joint bills. Or if it's, hey, this bank account gives us much more current yield or interest, then why not take advantage of free money opportunities? Another one, purpose-driven conversations around joining credit cards. Don't just pick a credit card for the sake of picking a credit card. Pick a credit card that pours back into your lifestyle, right? If you're someone who loves to travel and you're traveling frequently and miles are the thing that pour back into you because you know you're going to pay for a lot of flights, get a credit card that allows you to maximize the accumulation of miles, right?
Yes. Yep.
Personally, my wife and I are on the same page. We hate to fly. We don't enjoy it. We get anxiety around it. So for us, it's something completely different. Maybe it's cashback rewards. Maybe it's hotel points. Whatever it may be, figure out those purpose-driven experiences that you want to be able to capture and then get credit cards in that manner. And maybe you already have those credit cards as individuals. So now it's just a matter of adding your significant other as an authorized user on that credit card. and then dedicating when you're using them, right? If you have one credit card that's giving you 4% on gas, no matter where you use it, cash back, all gas purchases should go on that as a unit, as a household. If you're getting other credit cards that give you 6% cash back on groceries up to a specific threshold, doesn't matter who's buying the groceries, all the groceries should go on that card so you can maximize utilization of those budgeted items, right? Why not take advantage of free money? We're taking advantage of free money with our employer matches. Let's take advantage of free money with credit cards as long as we're doing it within reason and using prudence, right? Yep. Cash flow management and budget. We've talked about it. The budget's important. Everybody needs to have a budget in some form or fashion. Some people need it to be more rigid than others. Others can be more relaxed. Our philosophy is always, hey, as long as you're paying yourself first and you understand the risks on your balance sheet and in your life, long-term and short-term, anything that's left over after that is up for grabs. You do what you want with it. But again, purpose-driven conversations is really what's going to allow couples to find success financial, at least have the potential to.
Yep. No, I would totally agree there. And I think credit cards are oftentimes the gateway to your budget or to your lifestyle. A lot of people overlook that, hey, just simply swiping that card over and over again has a serious impact on the budget that we have jointly and trickles down into the goals that we have jointly. So being on the same page as to what goes on which credit card and what that spending threshold is, as you noted, can be super important in managing that. Leads us to number 4, which we actually have not spent too much time on today, but it is to check up on your financial immune system, and your financial immune system being the different protection components of your balance sheet. So Michael and I, as the ultimate optimists that we are, have not talked through any of the equal and opposite risks of compound interest or compound leveling up. When you join forces with your significant other or your spouse, you have the ability to level up your savings, your income, your goals, all of that stuff. But the equal and opposite risk there is if something were to happen to one of your incomes, to one of your healths, to one of your lives, right? The stakes that are on the table and the risks have now shifted significantly.
Yeah, I mean, right? All of us have, not to cut you off, all of us have the same risks on the table. The effects of those risks and the financial devastation that could occur from those risks are going to be different based on our own unique abilities. So tell me more about what couples should be thinking about when it comes to checking up their financial immune system as far as overall risk mitigation. Like at a high level, generalized, what are things that they should be considering?
So here's what I'd say first is high level, and I love, perhaps despite my significant other's challenge with it, I love open-ended questions, right? I love open-ended questions because they force people to think and they force people to answer, probably more so from their heart than what they might think is right. So oftentimes the question that I would ask, what might be my significant other or spouse, is, well, what happens if I or you don't come home later? And that's not, don't come home later, I'm going to go out with some friends and drink some beers, I'll be home later than usual. That's don't come home as in something really happens. Open-ended question. That begins to spark what are some of those really important items to think through as a financial unit, as a now joint team, as to what's super important. The first and foremost, especially as your family is growing, is estate planning. If there is a challenge medically, whether it's physical or mental, if there's a challenge in the financial picture and losing an income of some kind, either from death or disability, who is making decisions? Why are those decisions being made? If we have kids involved, who are the kids going to stay with? Who is going to help protect our family as a unit first? Is oftentimes that's most important for people. Things like wills, super important. Living wills, super important. Power of attorneys are super important. If I can't make decisions on my own behalf, who's going to make them and why? And then, of course, who is going to take care of the kids from a guardianship perspective?
Or the pets. Don't forget the pets, because people,
that's right.
Some people don't plan on having children, which is fine, right? It's not in their cards for themselves, but they want to have an abundance of pets. So, if for whatever reason you pass away, you have pets, then who's going to take your pet? If not, it's going to probably go somewhere you don't want it to go, and something's going to happen to it that you don't want to happen to it. So be prepared for that. And I will say that you and I probably see in most financial planning engagements with clients that the legal documents, getting the estate planning started or at least finalized, is something that most of us will drag our feet on, because it's such a hard conceptual conversation to have, because nobody wants to think about dying or becoming disabled or not being around anymore, right? But
Yes.
there are only three things that we can bank on reoccurring time and time again, and it's having to pay taxes, changes to tax laws, and of course, death, right? So let's take proactive steps to take care of that. And, the other thing that I want to get your thought on, because it comes up, right? We've already talked about early on in today's conversation. There's a high percentage of couples getting divorced, 45% due to financial friction, due to financial infidelity, due to just financial problems. And if most couples today, a higher number, are getting married at a later phase in life where they're more financially established as independents, what's that one word that comes up that a lot of people have a bad stigma with?
It is, if you ain't no punk holla, we want prenup.
I love it. Takes me back, Gold Digger by Kanye West for
There
those
we go, right?
who didn't catch that. Yeah, no, if you ain't no punk holla, we want prenup, right? Yeah. Now, prenup has a bad stigma with it or a bad connotation, and everyone has a different belief on it. But there are times when it's prudent and when it makes sense. So talk to me more about when you feel like it makes sense to have a prenup.
I think oftentimes it makes sense. The two easy ones that jump out is if you are approaching a new relationship later in life. I've spent a lot of time as a financial independent, and through that time in good decision making, I've seen a really significant increase in what my wealth has looked like before this relationship started. That's an easy opportunity to say, you know what, we've each spent a lot of time independently. Let's consider drawing up an agreement when both of us love each other the most that will ultimately protect, that's the big word, protect us later if in the event that something changes in our relationship. Relationships that start much later in life. Oftentimes what we also see from a prenup standpoint with clients is if clients come from different financial backgrounds or there are family influences that play into things.
Things like large inheritances.
Yes.
Or second marriages, right?
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yep.
It might not be the first marriage. It might be a second marriage or even blended families. So, yeah, and I think all that makes sense from when it makes sense to have that prenup. And again, it's having that conversation. It goes back to communicating. Not everyone feels comfortable with it, right? Some people have the mindset of, hey, we're saying I do. Divorce isn't even on the table. And there are others who might have a different mindset, and that's perfectly okay because it's purpose driven and it's unique to each individual's overall thought process and unique abilities within their household. So let's go ahead and get to the last one, right? So don't be afraid to ask for help. How do you see this taking place in your life, but also the lives of the individuals that you work with?
That's a great question. I would say the biggest takeaway from the prior four in not being afraid to ask for help, and we talked about this towards the back end of our last episode, is ultimately your financial journey, you are not supposed to be the expert in every single thing finance. And at the end of the day, if you are having trouble Googling what the answer should be, having trouble addressing how to best communicate with my spouse who might be coming from a different financial situation, if you are having questions on, well, what do I need to start thinking about? The first question you should be asking yourself is, how do I find help and who's the best person to help, right? It's ultimately an advisor or a financial professional's job to step in as a coach, a mentor, a mediator who can begin to help bridge the gap between these two independent financial lives. And oftentimes our effort, especially in client experience, is being more of the therapist than the barking coach or the authoritarian. Like, here's exactly what you have to do is never something I'll say. It's tell me more. Answer an open-ended question as to why X, Y, or Z is more or less important.
Yeah, oftentimes it's very much a counseling session, right?
Yes.
Acting as a mediator, acting as an objective third party that's an experienced certified financial planner, and making sure that what's being presented to these individuals is in their best interest, right? That's what you want. You want to establish a relationship with somebody that has your best interest in mind, right? That's more diagnosis focused versus product focused. Let's identify what the comorbidities are, and let's design a custom treatment plan to help get you back to being 130%. And so when you're able to partner with somebody, especially if you don't have the time, because that's often what we see, right? Is that these high earners, whether they're individuals, families, or business owners, they just start to run out of runway with time. And there's only so much time in the day that we have available for utilization. But even beyond that, we only have so much attention within that spectrum of time. Yep. So how do we maximize that? And how can we offload certain tasks that aren't our specialty that we need others to step in and be able to help optimize that for us? So create that defense mechanism for yourself, right? With your relationship and your finances. I tell couples all the time, it's much easier for you to get mad at me and fire me as your financial advisor as it is for you to get mad at yourself or your spouse
and fire them as your spouse, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, you don't want to have to do that. And so bring an objective third party to the conversation, right? As long as it's someone who aligns with your belief system and you align with their philosophy and the services are exactly what you need.
So how do you address when couples oftentimes come to the table jointly, but there's clearly not a 50-50 share of either the responsibility or just their involvement with you?
Yeah, I will say that I often encourage, hey, is the spouse who's less involved, does it make sense to get them involved, right? Even if it's for just one conversation or once a year or once every couple of years, because we want to make sure beneficiaries are appropriately modified and updated. We want to make sure that they understand what to expect. And one thing that we've started implementing here at Genesis Wealth Planning is, hey, let's establish a love letter to our significant other, to our spouse. And it's something that we, as the financial advisor, actually get to have a little bit of fun with, because each spouse is going to fill it out individual of one another, separate of one another. And they're not going to get to look and cheat off.
I was going to say, do you let them share?
No, I don't want them to share the letter, but what I want them to share are the additional components of this love letter, which are focused on the different websites that there are usernames and login credentials, right? Who are the professionals that I work with as the lead in our financial picture, whether it's an estate planning attorney, whether it's an insurance agent for property and casualty, whether it's a tax professional, whether it's a real estate agent, whether it's a mortgage person, right? A banker, whatever it may be. Who are the advisors in your sphere that are helping, coaching you, and guiding you? And as the financial advisor in these relationships, we actually have a big interaction with all those players that are
responsibility.
Yeah,
too.
Absolutely.
Right?
And we're able to mediate what our clients, best interests are with those other advisors, because we're seeing the entire comprehensive picture. We're not just isolated to a specific area of the financial balance sheet or their financial plan. So this love letter, I feel like, is important. It's something that can evolve. We store it for them on our end, and they have a digital copy also. But the biggest thing that I see that comes out of this, aside from that last words that you leave your spouse, is making sure that the surviving spouse knows exactly where to log in and what the passwords are. Because in today's day and age, most of us get caught up in using some sort of facial recognition to log in.
Yes.
Biometric login with our fingers, or just saving our passwords onto whatever device we're using, right? So write it down, put it somewhere safe, review it ongoing, just so that you can safeguard your financial plan, your financial household, and build that safety net for you and your spouse.
Yep. No, I love that. And I think it's just part of our work. Ultimately, what drives some of the passion behind our work is it's not just a spreadsheet at the end of the day, right? When couples get together, it's a fantastic unity, beautiful unity as to what life is going to look like. It makes life more meaningful. And at the end of the day, for us to be able to help share, coach, guide, mentor, at least even just observe what that looks like for couples is really cool to see and participate in each day.
Yeah, so I learned so much from today, especially even more about you as someone that I work with daily. I'm glad we were able to riff on this topic, right, and put this together out there for all of us to be able to grow from. Thank you again for setting this up and putting this together.
Of course. And if you found this episode helpful, please like, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and be sure to share it with friends, family, and colleagues. For more valuable insights, visit us at genesiswealthplanning.com/podcast, or feel free to submit questions directly to our contact page or emails in the description.
Are you considering hiring a financial advisor? If so, be sure to listen to episode 1 of Financial Fortitude. In this episode, we discuss the reasons why many people choose to hire a financial advisor and highlight the key qualities you should look for in the financial professional you decide to work with.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated or endorsed by PAS, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian and its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. Michael Acosta and Brady Hemmerly are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, OSJ 6115 Park South Drive, Suite 200, Charlotte, North Carolina 28210, 704-552-8507. Securities products and advisory services offered through PAS. Member FINRA SIPC financial representatives of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, NY. PS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. Michael Acosta's CA insurance license number 0M50974. Brady Hemmerly's California insurance license number 4353077. 7095145.1 expiration 10-26.